After Sunday dinner, my son's friend lingered in my quiet kitchen with something on his mind. I expected a casual favor or a forgotten phone. Instead, Lucas's trembling words opened a door I didn't even know was there. One that led to gratitude, second chances, and a truth that made my eyes sting before I could breathe. Before I begin, if you're watching, tell me where you're tuning in from. What city? What small town? What street of yours has the same kind of porch light I'm riding under tonight? I love picturing your neighborhoods as I speak. It was one of those evenings that smells like rosemary and dish soap. The good plates were drying in their wire rack, shining like they were proud of the meal they'd held. My son had ducked out with the last of the boys to catch the late football game at the bar. All noise and elbows and the kind of camaraderie that follows a full belly. But Lucas stayed behind, 27, polite to a fault, always the one to stack chairs after a backyard barbecue. I noticed him hovering with the empty water glass, turning it in his palms like he was measuring a decision. You can set that down, I said, because small talk is easier than the feeling that something important is about to tip over. Or if you're thinking of a refill, help yourself. Kettle's still warm for tea. I'll take you up on that, he said. His voice sounded a half step lower than usual. Careful chamomile if you've got it. I have a drawer that sticks, the one with the tea bags, and the apron ties and a pencil that never writes. I tuck it open with my hip. The house knew me and I knew it. The soft hum of the fridge door that doesn't seal unless you pat it twice. The scuff on the floor where my late mother's kitchen table chair always snagged. It's funny how on nights like that, a home feels like it breathes along with you. Lucas turned off the dining room light, leaving us with the worn cone over the sink. He leaned against the counter, but stood like a guest who didn't want to feel too comfortable. I've known him since he and my son were sophomores. Years of sleepovers and borrowed keys and pizzas eaten from the box. He had always looked like a boy you'd hand a set of house keys to if you had to run out, reliable, the kind who returned a favor with interest. Tonight he looked older, which is to say he looked more himself. Something on your mind? I asked, giving my best sideways smile, the kind that says I can wait if it helps. He nodded, eyes flicking to the window. Outside, the porch light caught the curve of my hydrangeas, brown and soft now that summer had stepped back. I poured the hot water and pushed a mug his way. He didn't lift it. He was bracing, I realized, like someone poised to open a letter with news already buzzing in his hands. I should have said this a long time ago, he began. But I didn't know how without making it weird. You can try me, I said. I'm sturdier than I look. He laughed once, the fragile kind, and then went quiet. I heard the small tick of the kitchen clock. The house gave us privacy the way only a lived-in home can, by humming just loudly enough to take our edges. Last year, he said, this time, maybe you remember, maybe not, I was missing a lot. Get-togethers, classes, everything. I told everyone I was busy with work. I wasn't. I was not okay. I set my own mug down slow. The word not okay carries a lot more weight than people admit. It can mean as many things as there are rooms in a house. I remember you went quiet for a bit. I said, careful. I thought about quitting, he said, eyes on the steam curling up from his cup. Not school, the other thing. The whole thing. The whole thing. I felt it like a cold draft at my ankles. The chopped vegetables in the sink looked suddenly too bright. A soup spoon turned its eye to the ceiling. I breathed in and found my voice steady. I'm hearing you, I said. Keep going. It felt like every door was locked from the outside, he said. But then we had one of those Sunday dinners. I don't even think you meant for it to be a big deal. You made pot roast. You told that story about your first apartment, how the ceiling leaked, and you learned which pots to place square so it sounded like rain on purpose. I smiled because I had forgotten I'd ever told that story. One person's throwaway becomes another's lifeline. The silver soup pot in the bathroom, I said. It made the best sound. You laughed, he said, and you passed me the bread before I even asked. You were just paying attention. You always pay attention, Olivia. You said. If your head is too loud to think tonight, use my kitchen table. It knows how to hold a mess. You said it like it was nothing. But I went home and wrote it down. And when it got too dark the next week, I read it again. And I came back the Sunday after that because I believed you that the table was strong and because you would notice if I didn't. He paused. The kettle clicked as it cooled. I reached for a towel and folded it for the sake of my hands, which wanted to do something kind. You kept me here, he said. And the words were modest as a whisper. I don't know if that's a fair thing to put on you, but it's true. Your house, your dinners, the way you ask real questions and wait for real answers gave me a way back. I wanted to thank you, but thank you sounds small compared to what I mean. It was strange. I realized I'd been holding myself together for so long that gratitude felt like a mirror I didn't remember owning. Tears are different at my age than they were when I was 20. Back then they'd sprint. Now they arrive with their hands out, gentle, asking permission. I let them. You're not making it weird. I said the room smelled like honey from the tea. I thought of all the times I'd wondered if anyone noticed the small work. That I saved the end pieces of bread because somebody likes them most. That I kept the porch light on a little longer because my son hates finding his way in the dark. That I make double batches because boys eat more when they feel welcome. You're making it real. He took a breath that seemed to ease something in his shoulders. There's more, he said. A reason I stayed behind tonight. I'm making a big decision. Scares me, but I think it's right. And I didn't want to do it without telling the person who taught me that a life is held together by small, faithful things. I waited. The trick I've learned is to let silence be a bowl you called out, not a void you rushed to fill. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a creased note card. The kind you buy in a pack of 50 and then hoard because blank spaces feel like promises. He glanced at it and back at me. I got in, he said, nursing the evening program at the community college and then transfer after the first year. I want to work in geriatrics. I want to be useful where it counts. I know it means fewer beers with the guys and more nights like this, studying at tables that know how to hold a mess. His mouth tilted and I wanted to ask if I could keep using this one sometimes. Not just the table, your presence, the way you make the air kinder with your permission. My heart knocked once, twice, steady as a drum my father used to keep under the bed when I was little. There was a pride so big it embarrassed me, as if I'd been complimented on a thing I didn't build, even though I'd sanded and painted it a dozen times. A dozen years of dinners. 1,000 small prayers whispered over sink water. With my permission, I said, and then I laughed because it felt too formal. Yes, Lucas, of course. You're welcome here, and I think you'll be a gift to anyone lucky enough to be under your care. He lifted the mug, then finally, and the steam pressed a kiss to his face. For a second I saw him the way I used to see my son when he'd come home from a hard day. Boy and man spliced together, edges softening into something you could trust. I thought of the men watching from their living rooms across the country, faces lit by screens, hands around their own warm cups. Maybe they've also learned that bravery looks like showing up with your honesty and asking to be known. I was afraid you'd think I was overstepping, he said. Or that it would sound, I don't know, like I meant something I don't. I know what you mean, I said. And I know what you don't mean. There's room in this world for love that doesn't ask anything it can't give back. We stood like that for a moment, the kind of moment you don't put music under because it would only crowd it. Then he set his mug down and looked toward the hallway where the dim light brushed the frames of old family photos. I noticed the old clock isn't chiming, he said. And I followed his gaze to the walnut mantel clock that had belonged to my father-in-law. It had been silent for months, stubborn and proud, years outlasting attention. Stopped in May, I said. I wound it, and it kept time until it didn't. I suppose I did the same thing for a while. I can try to fix it, he said. I've been taking apart small machines lately. It's calming, and if I mess it up, I'll take responsibility. The clock and I both appreciate your gentle hands, I said, and felt the warmth in my chest broaden like morning. He crossed the room and lifted the glass dome. He handled it with care I'd only ever seen given to newborns and heirlooms. His attention felt like a blessing disguised as a hobby. I watched his fingers, the way they learned the story of an object by being patient with it. He set the pendulum swinging, nudged a gear, listened. The house hushed to hear him. Sometimes they need to be level, he murmured. Sometimes they need just a nudge to start again. It's amazing how small the difference is between silence and a steady beat. You're telling me, I said, and we both smiled. The first tentative tick made a sound like a throat clearing. Then another a half second later, shy as a first step. Tick-tock. I wouldn't have believed a noise that modest could feel like applause. I pressed my palms together. He didn't look at me. Not yet. He was listening with his whole body. There, he said softly. There you are. For a while we talked about schedules, his classes, my morning walks, how we might trade soup for study time. He asked if I'd show him how I do pot roast the week before midterms to give him something to look forward to. I told him the real secret was nothing more complicated than patience and salt at the right time, and learning that letting things rest is as much an action as stirring. He wiped the counter even though it didn't need it because sometimes it's easier to absorb kindness while your hands are busy. He asked if I ever felt invisible now that the kids were mostly grown. I said yes some days. He asked what made me feel seen. I told him it was when someone asked a question and waited for the real answer and when they brought their real answer back to me. I can do that, he said, if you'll keep reminding me about rest and salt. Deal struck. Not the kind you sign with ink, but the kind you feel settle into your bones like a soft promise. When he reached for his coat, he looked taller, though maybe it was just the way certainty adds an inch. He hesitated at the door. I could tell there was one more thing lodged behind his teeth. What is it? I asked. My father called this afternoon, he said, and the air shifted. We haven't spoken in a while. He's getting older. He said he wants to try again. I don't know what that means yet. I don't even know if I want it, but I thought if I'm going to be a nurse, I should practice with my own heart first. I stepped close enough to put a hand on his forearm. I asked if he'd like to sit back down and think aloud or take the question with him and bring it back next Sunday. He chose the second, then changed his mind to the first, then laughed at himself and said, maybe both. Both is allowed. I said, most good things are. We made a plan. He'd bring over the acceptance packet so we could read the fine print together. I'd pull the recipe card for pot roast, and we'd make a grocery list that included patience and salt, and a dessert that doesn't pretend to be anything but a comfort. He'd call his father and write down how the conversation made him feel without editing. I'd take the clock's steady tick as a reminder that it's okay to start over twice or 10 times. At the door, he paused again and glanced back at the table. He'd think he was looking at a cathedral. Maybe in a way he was. Thank you, he said, the words simple and full. For the table, for noticing, for making a place to come back to. You're doing the brave part, I said. I'm just keeping the light on. He stepped out into the cool night. The porch bulb drew a circle around him. A little stage where a quiet life can be celebrated without an audience clapping. He lifted a hand in a small wave. I did too and closed the door on the soft sound of the clock, which kept on as if it had never forgotten how. Inside, I stood with my hands on the back of one of the kitchen chairs and looked at the shape of my home. A life held together by small, faithful things can feel plain until you look closely and see how it gleams. I'd wiped my eyes and laughed at myself, alone and not alone. There would be lists to make and onions to chop, and a boy who wasn't a boy anymore, learning how to be the kind of man who notices. The night had planted a seed I hadn't expected, that I could still grow too. If you're still listening from Chicago or Sarasota, or a little town with one stoplight and a diner where they know your order, I want you to know this. Sometimes the most moving words arrive in a voice you've known for years, speaking a truth you've been keeping for yourself. And when you open that door, even a crack, the whole house breathes easier. The clock ticked, the kettle settled, and I set out 2 bowls on the counter for next Sunday, just to save us the trouble later. The following Sunday, the house felt different before anyone even knocked. Maybe it was me expecting something. I'd set the table with more care than usual, smoothing the cloth until the creases gave up. The clock Lucas had coaxed back to life ticked with confidence now. Its sound filling corners I didn't know had been empty. I caught myself listening for it the way you listen for a heartbeat. Proof of life in a quiet room. My son arrived first, laughing, tossing his jacket over the back of a chair the way he always had. Then the door opened again, and there was Lucas carrying a grocery bag. He held it out like an offering. Dessert, he said. Peach cobbler. I made it myself. So if it's inedible, just lie to me. I laughed, but when I peeked inside, I saw he'd written made with patience and salt on the foil and black marker. The word sent a wave through me, half humor, half reverence. Dinner was easy like it always is when the people at the table know the rules without naming them. Pass the bread, laugh at old stories, let everyone speak at least once without interruption. I watched Lucas between bites, how he listened more than he spoke, and how he looked at my son with loyalty, not rivalry. That mattered. When the meal ended, and the boys drifted toward the living room, with the game murmuring from the television, I half expected Lucas to follow. Instead, he lingered again, gathering plates, his sleeves rolled back, and his forearms dusted with crumbs. We moved in rhythm at the sink, passing bowls, rinsing silver. There's a special intimacy in that kind of work, unspoken cooperation. After the last dish clinked into place, he dried his hands on a towel and turned toward me. His expression had the weight of someone rehearsing words all week. I called him, he said finally. I didn't need to ask who. His father. How did it go? I asked, studying my voice with the calm I knew he'd need. He was quiet at first. Lucas said, shifting his weight. Then he said he'd been waiting for me to call. He told me he doesn't want to waste time anymore. That he's proud I got in. And I wanted to believe him, but part of me kept thinking where it was that pride when I was 14. I nodded. I understood too well the ache of absence that lingers long after words of love arrive. Sometimes pride takes the long road, I said. But you don't owe him a full welcome all at once. You get to open that door inch by inch. His shoulders loosened. That's what I needed to hear. He pulled the acceptance packet from his jacket pocket, worn already at the edges. He set it on the counter like it was treasure. Will you look it over with me? Just so I know I'm not missing anything. We went page by page, my reading glasses sliding down my nose, his finger tracing each line. Tuition schedules, clinical rotations, a list of required shoes and stethoscopes. It was ordinary paperwork, yet it felt monumental. Like I was witnessing a young man putting bricks in place for a house no one else could build for him. At one point I glanced up and caught his eyes fixed on me. Not with loaning, not with anything reckless, but with a gratitude that carried its own kind of intensity. It startled me the way being seen can startle even at my age. You've got this, I said softly, and his jaw worked as though those words carried more weight than I'd intended. Later, when my son shouted from the living room for us to hurry with dessert, Lucas laughed and closed the packet. Guess I can't avoid my cobbler's judgment any longer. He carried it out, and when the first spoonful drew a round of praise, the grin that spread across his face was the kind a man remembers wearing only a handful of times in his life. As the night wound down and the others left, Lucas lingered again by the door. He looked at the clock, ticking steady in the hallway. Funny how a little nudge brings something back, he said. Then his eyes found mine. You've been that nudge for me, Olivia. I won't forget it. I felt the words press against me, not as a burden but as a gift. I thought of all the years I'd worried my small efforts didn't add up to anything. And here was proof. Living, breathing, deciding proof that they did. You don't have to remember. I told him. Just keep passing it on. He nodded, the kind of nod that seals a promise. When he stepped into the night, I watched until the porch light no longer reached him. Then I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the steady heartbeat of the clock. In that moment I realized growth isn't reserved for the young. It arrives whenever we let truth in. And at 52, with a house quieter than it used to be, I felt the quiet wasn't emptiness anymore. It was room. Room for new chapters. Room for voices that stayed behind after dinner. Room for words that could still move me to tears. I wiped my cheeks, smiling at myself, and set the kettle back on for tea. Some stories don't end at good night. They simply wait for the next Sunday with two bowls set out just in.